Good evening. As we are gathered in the People's House, it is most appropriate that the representative of the citizens of the District of Columbia would be the one to extend the welcome and to make us feel at home in the People's House. And so it is my distinct honor to introduce to you the Honorable Eleanor Holmes Norton, Delegate to the District of Columbia.
Thank you very, very much. And I want you to know that we're making this more and more of a People's House. We may not be there yet, but you can see, I think, by the 2012 election that we're on our way. I want to begin by offering my most sincere gratitude to the Metropolitan Community Churches and Global Institute for coming this evening, and especially the panelists you will be hearing from, and for coming so quickly forward and coming right here to assess the next steps for justice for our LGBT community throughout our country. Now, this is the faith community, so you know this is not a victory lap. That's not the way the faith community does things. The faith community is about reaching out and reconciliation, and here, of course, to address rights which should be above partisanship. I particularly appreciate your approach of looking for partners within the larger faith community. I know they are there. And I know that there should be plenty of encouragement since we have heard from the American people. Now, some have called the election a turning point, a watershed moment. I'm not sure what we will call it when we look back at history, but it's certainly clear that something important happened in the election of 2012. The numbers that tell some of it. Now there are 10 states, including the District of Columbia, who permit marriage equality among all people. No longer can the opponents say marriage equality has never been put to the American people, because 3 states answered yes: Maine, Maryland, and Washington State. Of course, we in the District of Columbia believe that there are some matters that you never put to the people. And this is one. Heaven help many of us in this room if our rights had been left for an up and down vote to people, whoever they were. This was one of the great innovations of the founders. We are even beginning to see progress in this People's House. For example, the Respect for a Marriage Act, which is essentially a repeal of DOMA, has 157 co-sponsors. Now, the opposite act, called the Marriage Protection Act, against our 157, has 27. I wish I could say that was the real ratio in the House of Representatives, but it just does tell you where the energy is. And if we leave behind the House and I'm not leaving them yet. I want first to finish up the voting, as a matter of fact. Because we have the first openly gay woman, a lesbian, who was one of my colleagues, Tammy Baldwin, will still be one of my colleagues in the state of the United States. And in this House, we now have 4 openly gay members. You know, I was left to, my principles were really tested. One of my good friends, a Democrat, had a very tough race. And the tough race came from a Republican gay man from Massachusetts. I said, I'm glad I don't have to vote in this one. My colleague prevailed. He's a longtime member of the House. But it certainly in Massachusetts was not a vote against the gayness of his opponent.
Yeah.
We've had the first ballot initiative I know of where voters refused to constitutionalize a gay marriage provision in their own state constitution. Now, in the face of all of that from the people, the president has taken action that is important indeed, because it was clear that this House was limited in what action it was willing to take. And I have a list of some of the important presidential initiatives. Remember, there is considerable presidential authority. We saw what the president did when the Republicans refused to pass the DREAM Act. So he had authority, clear presidential authority. As a prosecutor, or to say to his prosecutors, you will take the worst first. You will never get it. In that case, of course, to our kids who came here with their parents. In the same way, the president has taken remarkable initiatives without the help of the Congress, using his presidential authority. The president and the vice president announced their support for marriage equality. And I think it's important, and I know the faith community will understand perhaps better than most Americans. You know, the president said he evolved. That needs to be respected. He didn't say, I'm unlike the rest of you dwarfs who didn't understand from the beginning that there should be marriage equality. He came, he thought, he probably prayed, and he reached his own conclusions. And when the president evolves, you can imagine that there will be a lot of other people thinking of whether they should evolve too. He used his own initiative to indicate, to sign, no, this was not his initiative, I'm sorry, this is a bill. Some of it's his initiative, some of it's a bill. Don't Ask, Don't Tell had a lot of presidential push behind it in the last lame duck. And so it passed. He personally lifted the ban that prohibited people with HIV/AIDS from entering the United States. When the Democrats were in power, we passed the Hate Crimes Prevention Act at last. The president has ensured that hospital visitation and medical decisions involving the rights of gay and lesbian patients have to be respected. The president led the United Nations in restoring a sexual orientation in the definition of human rights after it had been pulled out. He led its back. He has announced that the Department of Justice will no longer defend DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. And it looks like Some courts are no longer defending them either, I'm pleased to say, given the progress we've seen in the courts. The president has banned discrimination in the federal workplace based on gender identity. We didn't pass it here. He has executive authority to do it, and he did. He has clarified the Family Medical and Leave Act, a very important bill that ensures that the act applies to LGBT employees of the federal government as well. He announced HUD's new rule protecting against housing discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We didn't pass that, the president did, and it's just as much law as if we had. And I really like this one. Didn't it cheer your heart when the Pentagon celebrated LGBT pride for the first time in the year? If that's not progress, I don't know what it looks like. I recognize we still have work to do. I know your panel does, and I know those of you who've been good enough to come this evening recognize that. For example, it is my view that African Americans have a special leadership role to play whenever there is a justice issue of this kind before the American people. So it always saddens me when African Americans aren't the first up. When you look at Maryland, passed in Maryland. But it passed with 46% of blacks voting for the initiative and 54% of blacks voting against. But here's something interesting. Black men voted against marriage equality 40%. Leave it to black women. They voted 51% for marriage equality. You better talk to your wife before you go to the polls. Find out which way the wind is blowing, what justice is all about. But the fact that Maryland, that it was that close, when some believed in Maryland it would be much further apart than 46 to 54, means African Americans are beginning to see the clear analogies between themselves and the LGBT community. Well, there are some parts of the society that we can never expect. We have to respect where they are so long as they respect where we are. We know that in Europe, Spain has upheld its gay marriage law, and France is on the verge of legalizing gay marriage, and yet the Vatican, right after the election, in its front page newspaper, said, and I'm quoting the front page, "The church is called to present itself as the lone critic of modernity, the only check to the breakup of the anthropological structures on which human society was founded." Now, it's really interesting and important that the Vatican places itself as lone. It knows it's losing. And what is it against? Modernity. My goodness. Where does that place you? In antiquity? If you no longer can command in these Catholic countries the flock, maybe it is time for some reflection. I dare not advise the Vatican. Especially since its spokesman said, don't expect the church to stop insisting that society recognizes a specific place for marriage between a man and a woman. Well, I frankly do not expect the Vatican to change, but I expect American Catholics to change. Yeah. The progress in any case, my good friends, is unmistakable. And evaluating this progress, we have to evaluate it against the millennia, against time. If you evaluate it against human time, you have to first consider what I can only think of as inhumane suffering throughout the millennia for millions, billions of gay men and women. If the church wants to do anything, it seems to me it has to wonder where the repentance lies for all of these men, and what kind of suffering must there have been to feel so strange that you couldn't reach out to anybody else, lest your strangeness become known. How does one suppress part of oneself that way? And throughout human time until virtually this moment in history, that is what huge numbers of our brothers and sisters face. So if we look that way, we understand how slow civilization has been to come to grips with the differences among us that must be respected. But if you want to feel better, as I do, about the progress that has been made, you can evaluate the progress, what I think we can call genuine progress, which has occurred in little more than a decade. And that progress has been significant, and in some cases even remarkable, so remarkable that I feel confident in saying the majority of the American people now respect the rights of gay men and women the way they respect their own. It's a majority, it's not a huge majority, it is a majority. And let me tell you why I think it's a majority. It's generational. Yes. If, as it seems to be, if it is generational as it seems to be, then we think this kind of discrimination will vanish within our own generation. Now, consider that that is a much better record than the large groups that preceded the LGBT community had. Women had to fight for 200 years to get their suffrage. African Americans, even after slavery, were 100 years without their rights. So if you look at what has happened, it seems to me the American people have learned from what has happened to others that they must shorten this time when they are faced with any group of their own who does not enjoy the justice that others indeed have. I am not even pessimistic about my Republican colleagues here. Young Republicans in this country appear to be breaking with their unreconstructed elders. This is not an issue for young Republicans. I haven't seen a poll of where the majority are, but I know from my reading that this is not the issue that they are looking at as part of their Republican philosophy. Some of the Republicans appear to be in a reflective, some might even call it self-critical mood when they saw the new majority of Americans turn from their party in the 2012 elections. They will have to think how to reconcile their very good and much needed advocacy of family values. In my own community, one of my issues of greatest concern is marriage. Not gay marriage. Right. Way ahead of the time. Way ahead of the rest of us. I have a commission on black men and boys because I'm so concerned about the disappearance, the virtual disappearance in whole sections of the African American community of marriage, where 70% of your children are born to single women. We got a marriage problem. We don't, not a gay marriage problem. So how will the Republicans reconcile their very good and much needed advocacy of family values with imposing the marriage of loving gay adults at a time when their advocacy of marriage is really needed among straight Americans, white as well as black, half of whose, if you're white, half of those marriages dissolve, while millions of other young people in our country choose to live together, have children together, and never get married. There is work to be done on marriage, but I sure don't see it in the gay community as the place to begin at this point. It should not be difficult, in my judgment, for Republicans to reconcile marriage equality with Republican philosophy. This is the party of my colleagues who every day go to the floor to talk about mitigating government in their lives. Their party includes many libertarians. It is no conflict with traditional republicanism to embrace marriage equality. Just as the faith community is seeking ways to bring together, our burden here in the House and Senate is to begin to do the very same thing here. The bipartisanship on marriage may not be as far away as we think. In my own service in the Congress, I have seen Republicans vote on specific marriage issues in ways they would not have even 5 years ago, because their own gay people on, not marriage issues, on LGBT issues, because their own gay constituents have made it known that they are there and they will be counted. So I salute our faith community tonight as you begin along the path that makes you, I think, best qualified among us all to lead us to think through what the real and realistic next steps are. And I thank you for your most important leadership for justice for LGBT people in this country and in our world. Thanks very much for coming.
The words of Congresswoman Norton come from one who is a stalwart for justice, a long voice of reason, a person that we should all admire, and whose history goes so far back that it's just inspirational to be in her presence. And so, again, can we be thankful for her presence here tonight? So the words of Congresswoman Norton has set the tone for the rest of the evening, the rest of our time together. I want to welcome you to the next chapter in LGBT Justice, a Faith Perspective. We are also thankful to the sponsoring organizations, Congresswoman Holmes Norton's office, Metropolitan Community Churches, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, the Global Justice Institute, and all who have made this evening possible. Let me invite you to silence your cell phones and to quiet your iPads during our time here. Let me also invite you to sign the sign-in sheet that is at the table in the hallway. We'd like to capture your presence here, so please, if you have not done so, do sign in.
And I'll pass one around in case you run to that phone.
As your moderator for the evening, I will perform the tasks of prompting dialogue, keeping us on message and on time, although we're behind time. we'll catch up. And hopefully bringing out the best information from brilliant thinkers. I am Reverend Cedric A. Harmon, co-director of Many Voices, a Black church movement for gay and transgender LGBT justice. For much too long, the place and power of faith or spirituality has been defined for the general population by caricatures, misperceptions, random spokespersons, assumptions, and individual experiences, good and some not so great. Some have shunned public policy work for religious reasons, or so they say. Others have abused public policy to advance their own theology. We know this to be true. And still others have only seen faith leaders as convenient means to immediate legislative ends. We know this to also be true. Tonight, however, we will unravel this twisted mix of ideas and cast an eye toward a public policy advocacy faith union. A public policy advocacy faith union. What a concept. The new normal, yes, the new normal, is right within our grasp on LGBT justice and on justice more broadly. So, let's together start the exploration right now, tonight. Our panelists are known to many of us in the room, so I will take just a few brief moments of introduction to name them. And then, following that, we will begin our opening statements from the panelists. The panelists have 1 minute and 45 seconds. Actually, 2 minutes. 1 minute and 45 seconds to state what has been learned about the role of faith from last week's election and what the future may hold. 1 minute, 45 seconds. For our panel tonight, we have the Reverend Dr. Nancy Wilson. Reverend Dr. Wilson is the global leader of the Metropolitan Community Churches, an ecumenical denomination committed to justice open to all. Under Wilson's leadership, the denomination has deepened its long-standing commitment to Christian social justice, becoming known as the Human Rights Church in many parts of the world. Dr. Wilson was appointed by President Obama to the White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships in 2011. She has been a spiritual activist for 39 years as a pastor and a lesbian. Reverend Dr. Yvette Flunder, the presiding bishop of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, a native of San Francisco, California. Bishop Flunder is a third-generation preacher with roots in the Church of God in Christ. Bishop Flunder is an ordained minister of the United Church of Christ and a graduate of the Ministry Studies and Master of Arts programs at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, California. She received her Doctor of Ministry degree from San Francisco Theological Seminary in San Anselmo, California. She pastors City of Refuge United Church of Christ in San Francisco. David Stacy. David Stacy is the Federal Legislative Advocacy Lead Person, Deputy Legislative Director for the Human Rights Campaign. His portfolio at the Human Rights Campaign includes marriage and relationship recognition, hate crimes, immigration, Social Security, and the District of Columbia. He is also the primary contact for the Northeast region. Prior to joining HRC in 2005, Stacy was a legislative assistant for Representative, now Senator, Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin. He was the founder of Action Wisconsin, the statewide LGBT civil rights group, and served 2 terms as president of the United Council of University of Wisconsin Students, the statewide student association for the University of Wisconsin system. Rachel Lazar, Deputy Director, the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism. Rachel Lazar is Deputy Director there, and Ms. Lazar has a diverse background in policy advocacy, coalition building, message development, and political strategy. She served as Senior Vice President at Hathaway Communications and as Director of the Cultural Program at Third Way, where I met her. At Third Way, she launched the Come Let Us Reason Together initiative, which mobilized evangelical Christians and progressive activists to work together on divisive social issues. Sharon Netman Hicks, Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition. Ms. Hicks came to the National Black Justice Coalition in October of 2009. The National Black Justice Coalition is a civil rights organization dedicated to empowering Black lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT people. Sharon is renowned for her political acumen and an ability to bring together unlikely allies as stakeholders in joint collaborations that strengthen the progressive movement and give power to new ideas and policies. The Gill Foundation in 2007 identified her as a key ally for the LGBT equality movement. Joseph Ward. Joseph Ward III is the director of Believe Out Loud, an online network that empowers Christians to work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender equality. He is a communications and social media strategist and works at the intersection of religion and LGBT equality. Joseph also is someone that I met not very long ago and has thoroughly impressed me with his abilities and skill. He served as field organizer for the former Senator Hillary Clinton's historic 2008 presidential campaign. Sarah Dreyer. Sarah Dreyer serves jointly on the staffs of both the Episcopal Church's Office of Government Relations and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America's Washington office. She is responsible for the federal legislative and policy advocacy of both churches on its U.S. foreign policy and international issues. And according to scriptures, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. The Reverend Dr. Dennis W. Wiley is co-pastor of the Covenant Baptist United Church of Christ. A distinguished theologian, prominent civil rights activist, and gifted musician, and yes, the man can sing and play. The Reverend Dr. Dennis W. Wiley, PhD, is pastor of Covenant here in Washington, D.C. He is a contributor to Fighting Injustice to Reach Equality or FIRE initiative at the Center for American Progress. He also serves on the Human Rights Campaign Religion Council. Our esteemed panelists, let's give them a round of applause. So, 1 minute, 45 seconds. Reverend Dr. Nancy Wilson.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and there's no group of people I would rather be with and in this amazing place and with all of you. So thank you very much. I want to take quite a personal privilege and say that I think one of the things that amazed me most about this election was how the media had to begin speaking about the white vote. I took particular joy in that, to think that white is now just one demographic among others, instead of being this, norm against which everything else should be measured. And I think that's a powerful, powerful shift that undergirds a lot of what I felt and heard in this election that was hopeful. Also want to say that I've worked in MCC and been out for 40 years and came out at a time when the religious phobia of the LGBT community was so intense. You just simply couldn't be a religious person, really, and be considered a part of the mainstream of the LGBT movement, and also dealing with the homophobia of religion. And so I've lived in those conflicts in those worlds for a long time, and it feels like things are shifting so fast now in terms of the integration and the changing alliances that it's so powerful. I also wanted to say this election demonstrates to me and the president's last 4 years and what we're heading into, the power of the U.S. federal government worldwide is unprecedented in the history of the world. And when the U.S. Secretary of State can get up and say LGBT rights are human rights on behalf of the President of the United States, it has an impact all over the world that changes things. Because something happens in our prison system and criminal justice system, that justice is also being worked at in so many different areas. It's absolutely powerful, unprecedented, and amazing. And all of that was at stake in this election. I also think the untold story of this election is really the amazing alliances and coalition of religious progressives with secular people. You know, I sometimes feel like I have more in common with a lot of secular and non-religious people who may say I'm spiritual but not religious, or not even spiritual, but we share some core values that are, I believe, spiritual values. And we should not be naive that people who lost in this election and people who feel very differently about their faith journey and what it means are not going to give up, and they're not going to just go away. Believe me, they will reorganize, and they will continue to do things like export homophobia in places all over the world. But I also think it's so powerful that the religious coalitions that are coming together around values and around important things and recognizing each other's rights and needs. You know, a lot of people who belong to faith groups that are considered homophobic or very conservative in their leadership and hierarchy, so many people in those churches and religious groups defect in place. Yes. And they vote opposite of what their religious leaders want them to. And they are also our amazing allies who are changing from within their own religious systems. This is a time of extraordinary opportunity for people to show spiritual courage. Last but not least, I believe that fairness is what resonates in the American public psyche. And fairness is a spiritual value. It's a religious value, a prophetic value that we call justice. Thank you.
Mr. Flunder.
I get an extra minute because I'm a Pentecostal. John 8:32 says, "You shall know the truth,
Yes.
and the truth shall make you free." In my reflection post-election, there's a couple of things that come up for me. One is that coming from or emerging from an oppressed people, both as an African American, as a same-gender loving woman, and as a same-gender loving woman who came out in a traditionally conservative religious environment. Oppression teaches us how to oppress. Oppression does not teach us liberation. Because oppressed people know the system that oppresses us inside out. We need to know it in order to survive. And so I think our post-election reflection should include our taking care that we do not default to the dysfunction that we are being delivered from. Why? Because oppressed people can develop new systems of oppression. Because there is some degree of that written on our DNA after years and years of having experienced it. And sometimes our leanings toward freedom will exhibit for us just how we have been colonized by the things that we need very much to fight against. Especially while we're in celebration mode, while we're so grateful. And so I am suggesting that the LGBT community, with some leadership and guidance from the religious community of the LGBT community, look very closely now at how we are treating one another. From faith group to faith group, race to race, gender to gender, gender expression to gender expression, political party to political party. If we are going to demonstrate the love of God for real to the world, we have to do something different than the ways in which our oppressors have treated us. You shall know the truth, but knowing the truth is a great deal more than assenting to it mentally. You shall know the truth suggests that we must embrace the truth. Got to lay down with the truth. Got to kiss the truth, be kissed by the truth. We've got to do more than assent to it. We have got to allow it to change our lives. And it's not a new and novel truth that everyone is welcome to the family of God. It's just that over a period of time, we have accepted things like homophobia and misogyny and sexism and racism and classism and a whole host of other isms. And I think that if we're going to be standard bearers, we have to first purge ourselves of the things that divide us. And finally this, every system of oppression is built on some normal. Welcome to the new normal. I like that. But welcome to freedom and truth as the new normal. And not our knowledge of it, but our living of it. Every system of oppression is built on some normal. That's how we came to accept racism and homophobia and sexism and Islamophobia as normal. And it can make us unready for the new and current normal. There's a shift in the atmosphere. One of my friends said it well. He said, if you go to the South, underneath the Mason-Dixon line, behind the Cotton Curtain, and you see, you know the folks I'm talking about, where they wear the jeans from 30 years ago, where you can see the booty crack in the back. You know what I'm talking about? And the red flannel shirt. And they walk down the street and everybody looks the same and nobody stops to give concern because it is the normal. That doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it looks good. But it's normal. We have to shift the normal. So the things that are incorrect are called incorrect. It starts with us, it generates in us, and then it moves from us. We who have been in the wilderness are the ones that can be the eyes to lead people out. God bless you.
Bishop Grace Abound, you got your extra time. David Stacy.
So when I was asked to be on this panel, I almost said no, because it's really not fair to put a policy wonk lobbyist on with a bunch of religious leaders who, preach every day. So I'll do my best, but I'm in a different league as far as talking. I want to start where Reverend Wilson started out, because for many LGBT people, religion was not someplace where they felt comfortable.
Right.
Even though a majority of LGBT Americans say that faith is a central part of their lives. And, that's changing, but, there's more work to be done there. But we know that's not the full story, because, there have been many denominations and faith leaders who have spoken out, and there are more every day doing that. And we've seen that on policy, and we have to deepen that, but, the Federal Marriage Amendment in 2004 was something that threatened religious liberty of people of faith who believed in same-sex marriage. And it threatened the religious liberty of people who didn't believe in same-sex marriage. And that was a catalyst, I think, to begin sort of a beginning of a deeper relationship of bringing faith leaders to the public square to speak about their religious liberty in the context of same-sex marriage. And it was uncomfortable for many. It was uncomfortable for the LGBT community in some ways too. But it was a necessary marriage, as it were. And we also saw that, one little story I really love to tell about passage of the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crime Prevention Act. And this is not the passage in 2009 where it got to the president's desk and got signed. This is the passage in 2007 where it didn't ultimately get to the president's desk, but it passed the Democratic-controlled House for the first time in real form. We had some successes before. And going into that vote where they were bringing the bill to the floor, Speaker Pelosi and Barney Frank and Tammy Baldwin weren't really sure that we were going to have the votes to pass it. Or if we had the votes to pass it, that the Republicans would be able to pass a motion to recommit that would gut the bill in some way. And so they said, we've got to make sure we really get our caucus behind it, because there's all these members worried about the vote and how tough it's going to be, and it's going to be hard in their district, and lots of the blue dogs were like, I don't know, and we didn't get all of them at the end of the day. But there were a bunch of them in the middle, like, it's hard, is this really what we should be doing? So there was a Democratic caucus, which is when all the Democrats get together in the morning before the vote, and they all meet and talk about whatever issues they're talking about that day. And so this caucus was devoted to the hate crimes bill passage. And they brought in Judy Shepard, the mom of Matthew Shepard, to tell her story. And so she told her story, and one of the things we were worried about was that gender identity might be stripped out of the bill by the Republicans. That's what they would try to do. So she talked a lot about how important gender identity was. And people were moved, and how can you not cry when Judy Shepard tells her story? And then Barney Frank talked. And Barney Frank talked about how he was now chairman of the Financial Services Committee, but that when he was growing up, he was a kid who was afraid to come out. And he still remembers being that kid and what it felt like. And now he's a big shot, nobody's gonna mess with him, but he still remembers being that kid. And he practically cried, tears came to his eyes in the caucus. I don't think any Democrat had ever seen Barney Frank cry before or since, and probably never will. And then they had Dave O'Malley, who was the police chief in Laramie, Wyoming, and was the guy who investigated Matthew Shepard's case. And he was a Republican conservative police chief. He was sheriff, he was police chief of Laramie, Wyoming. He didn't know there was a gay community in Laramie. I mean, he knew, intellectually he knew, but he had never interacted with them until this happened. And suddenly there were all these people that he never really knew existed. And he was transformed by that experience. And we talked about in the caucus with all these Blue Dog Democrats, how that was a transforming experience and how important it was. And then John Lewis got up and talked about how we had to bring justice to this case, but every case, every future case. And the transformative nature, which, John Lewis was the only one who, really explicitly brought religious themes into it in a conscious way, in an explicit way, but that really suffused all of the things that everybody else was saying, and were part of it. Out of that caucus, those Democrats, those Blue Dogs felt better about things. They felt like, I'm going to go out and do the right thing, whatever the political consequences were. And they felt good about that vote after they cast it, because they knew they did the right thing. And so part of what our challenge is to meet people's souls and change who they are and how they view things, to take it out of the political context in a way, even though we're going to be operating explicitly in that context. And that's part of what I think this election was about. And when you look at the marriage campaigns, I won't go on too long because I know I'm at time, but we'll be talking about it as the marriage campaigns around and the faith coalitions that were created and how that's exactly what they did.
Rachel Lazar.
Go. At a time such as this, I am only excited about the opportunity for the faith community to continue to further LGBT justice. Here's why. My personal experience dealing with religious people struggling to accept LGBT rights is that once they start moving, there is an unstoppable force compelling them towards greater acceptance. I myself, as a Jew and a progressive, have sat down with centrist evangelical Christians on the other side of this issue with the express purpose of finding some shared values and path forward together on LGBT equality. Over time, I saw them evolve before my very eyes, from recognizing that we are all created in the image of God, to supporting workplace protection, to helping pass the hate crimes bill. Now at least one of them is getting close to supporting marriage equality. My point, once we get these folks to the table and they are talking to us, meeting us, in dialogue with us, the momentum shifts quickly in the direction of expanding LGBT rights. This is supported by some fascinating one-on-one focus groups that the think tank Third Way did to explore how Americans think and feel at the metaphorical level about LGBT equality. Their research found that no matter where you were on this issue, you believed that this country was on a journey going in the direction of equality. 2012 has been a tremendous year exhibiting this forward motion. The president announced his support for marriage equality and re-won office just 6 months after doing so. We won 3 ballot initiatives and worded good ones and worded off the bad one for the first time. Nuns on the Bus officially debuted, making clear their Catholic teaching priority was nothing to do with things below the belt, but instead was a faithful budget. We saw the election of the first lesbian senator, the first openly bisexual congresswoman, and 2 new gay congressmen. But on top of that, conservatives, including religious conservatives, eyes were opened in a new way to the need to consider a different tack on our issue. I think that the progressive faith community can play a tremendously helpful role in furthering marriage equality by bringing a voice of morality and growing supportive interfaith coalitions, but also that we can help ensure workplace protection throughout this country by working in coalition with the usual and the more unusual faith bedfellows, and perhaps laying the foundation for more unusual coalitions on LGBT equality to come.
Sharon Lippman Hicks.
When Mitt Romney decided to air his ugly head again today and utter the words that President Obama won the election because of the gifts he gave what we know as the underserved, the gifts that he led his administration to make sure that the invisible became visible. He called them gifts. So I guess the tax cuts for the rich are the gifts from the Republicans. So I start with that because of the morality issue. The conservatives for too long have always won the morality war. They're the values people. And finally this country got it right to understand who the values voters are. Finally, in the exploitation of Jesus Christ himself, of loving thy neighbor, prevailed. Finally, society got it right. And I say that when I think of the question asked of us, that faith groups and LGBT justice groups can collaborate. This was the perfect storm. This was all stars being aligned. This was a time, and I was on the ground during Prop 8, and I lived in Washington, D.C. And post Prop 8 in January 2009, I was called to Pasadena to a room full of clergy, all white, not a single Latino clergy in the room, and maybe 2 or 3 black leaders, and I brought them all. And everyone called us everything but the child of God, in hearing over and over and over again how the black community was not properly embraced, the black LGBT leadership was not called to the game, they were never called to the table. I distinctly remember more than a year ago, sister at your church, where the DC black LGBT clergy leadership came together to say, what is our role? What are we going to do for Maryland? And it never stopped. And when I think about all the interfaith workings, and I got to call out my brother MacArthur Flournoy for his outstanding leadership on behalf of all of our communities. It made the black versus gay war, the black and gay visibility. Because too often the narrative is black versus gay, which is a complete insult to my constituency from a perspective that there's a very unhealthy conversation about being black and gay. And there were many times in the campaign, black and gay had to fight their way in. But it was always a healthy fight, a healthy dialogue, a healthy understanding that we were not here to be transactional, that we would be the beneficiaries as well as everyone else. And there was this uniqueness. Honestly, I never saw the white battle play out in Maryland because we were just so suffocated by all the outreach to black and gay and black versus gay. And that's a compliment because that showed that there was an intentional strategy, non-stop, in a manner that I hope it's bottled up, because I see so much value in how we won the values war. And we were unapologetic about how marriage equality builds stronger families. And we were unapologetic about understanding the systemic challenges of broken families that are not LGBT families, to make the direct and distinctive correlation on how we are trying to improve society's nuclear family. And whereas it's called the new normal now, we all have to eventually change it to just marriage and just family.
Thank you.
We celebrate Candy Holmes along with MacArthur Flunder.
Absolutely.
Joseph Ward, Sarah Dreyer, and Pastor Dennis Wiley, in that order. 148.
So I will keep it very brief. You know, our team after the election, we all just talked about how organized the state campaigns were and how great the intentionality of really working with people of faith was constantly. When I was in Seattle for a little bit, a couple months ago, working with the faith team there were so many clergy and people who were just so willing to put forth their story. And the great thing was, you know, there were just a variety of stories. There were people who have been allies, you know, since the day they were born, to those who really had some difficult journeys and some real challenges theologically, you know, in their own path. And the work that we did with Believe Out Loud is that's our mission. Is we really do want to change hearts and minds by really offering those authentic paths and journeys that people are taking. And so my biggest takeaway from this election was really that is a good plan going forward, is to really, we saw so many PSAs and so many commercials where there were Catholic grandparents talking about their gay kids and how their shift happened. There were the clergy in Washington who were talking about their path and their change of hearts. And I think, as the Congresswoman said, you know, in her opening remarks, it's the respect, just really being able to respect people and really being able to try to figure out how can we move you along and work with you. That's really respecting where you're at, but really trying to serve the justice that we're all, you know, really working for. So that was my big takeaway, and you know, the things that we're going to keep doing, Believe Out Loud, with upcoming states and upcoming initiatives to really try to really focus on those stories to change hearts and minds.
Perfect.
I want to go back to the basics for a second. Jesus said, "I give you one commandment, that you love one another." Now, this was Jesus turning his back on the cultural norms and rules that had become laws, and focusing us again on the principle of Christianity. And I believe that when we take this seriously, then theology becomes discursive. This is interestingly something that theologians and historians and political scientists all miraculously agree on, that religion is somehow, and theology is somehow discursive. When I say that, I don't mean that it's changeable and subject to our wills and our desires. What I mean is that to say that theology is discursive recognizes and acknowledges that we humans, as humans, are evolving in our capacity to understand and implement the radical hospitality that Jesus was demonstrating. And I see this discourse, this discursive theology in our recent election, and I am pleased to say that I see it in the two churches with whom I have the pleasure of working. The ELCA in 2009 decided by vote to allow individual congregations who want to call and ordain openly gay and lesbian ministers, that they have the freedom to do so. The Episcopal Church several years ago decided that they would be ordaining gay and lesbian ministers. About 9 years ago, 2003, 9 years ago, yeah. 9 years ago, they elected their first openly gay bishop, as you all know. This summer, They passed, according to the official church canon, canonical order, they passed and approved a liturgy that allows them to recognize and celebrate same-sex unions, and also approved the ordination of transgender individuals who want to become priests. This has been not without its challenges, both in domestic circles and in our global partnerships. And I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A, but I want to lift up the fact that our presiding bishops have demonstrated us a leadership role. Presiding bishops Catherine Jeffrett-Shorey and Mark Hansen have demonstrated to us how to deal with these challenges and this dissent as we are discursively moving forward. And that's a model of inclusion, and they, moving toward inclusion in a way that they don't ever compromise, but also staying in dialogue with those people who are dissenting. And I think that that's the only way that we can help our brothers and sisters move forward in this discourse toward Jesus' radical hospitality.
As I continue to celebrate the results of the 2012 election, I'm cautiously optimistic that that historic day represents indeed a watershed moment regarding the relationship between the Black faith community on the one hand and the LGBT community on the other, realizing that they are not mutually exclusive communities. According to the Washington Post, as Delegate Norton said, 46% of African Americans who voted in Maryland during this election supported marriage equality. Despite the fact that this report does not break down the Black vote according to religious or non-religious affiliation, this percentage represents a major development when one considers that the Black community is so strongly influenced by Black churches and other African American communities of faith. What would account for this significant development? Perhaps the most immediate factor would be that President Obama, who according to the Pew Research Center received 95% of the Black Christian vote, endorsed marriage equality last May. Perhaps a second, more long-term factor is related to what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. meant when he observed that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In other words, whether we are talking about Black rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, and despite the fact that the church is often dragged along, kicking and screaming to support these rights, there is a relentless movement afoot in this society, this nation, and this world toward freedom, equality, and justice for all. The last factor is that an increasing number of Black religious leaders are courageously breaking their silence and speaking out in favor not only of marriage equality, but of LGBT equality in general. Now, because this can be such a risky proposition for African American clergy who are leading congregations which tend to cling to ultra-conservative theological and biblical views, I have noticed recently that many Black preachers in their support for the freedom to marry draw a sharp line, draw a sharp distinction between marriage as a legal or civil right, R-I-G-H-T, on the one hand, and marriage as a moral or religious right, R-I-T-E, on the other. We talked a little earlier about this separation between church and state. And this distinction is strategically significant because it enables ministers to express their support for same-sex marriage while simultaneously emphasizing to their parishioners and congregations that this support poses no threat to the traditional values, beliefs, and practices which they hold so dear. Now, so, and I know my time is up, but let me just, right. So I conclude by simply saying While this strategy produces political fruits in the electoral process, I close with these two questions. When and how do we transform the hearts and minds of our homophobic and heterosexist brothers and sisters of faith in the churches, the mosques, and elsewhere, so that their support for LGBT justice is more than a temporary means to a relatively short-term political end? And number two, how can straight black people of faith join forces, and not just black people, but straight people with our LGBT brothers and sisters? And I am speaking somewhat to the black community because we struggle with this. Not only around issues of LGBT equality, but around all of the issues: poverty, mass incarceration, health care, inadequate housing, poor education, unemployment, etc., that affect each and every one of us as citizens of this society, this world, and as children of God.
Let's thank all of them for their opening statements. So, as I said, we're going to start to untwist and untangle this miasma that we're in right now. So there are some questions. I'm going to propose some questions, and I want you to respond as quickly and succinctly as possible, but do respond. Not everyone has to respond. Okay? So if someone responds well, give them a nod and let's go on. Okay? All right, here we go. If justice is what love looks like in public, dare I quote Cornel West tonight, our brother, beloved brother, has some issues. Is justice wholly the work, W-H-O-L-L-Y, wholly the work of faith communities, or are advocacy groups active on issues from a justice perspective and willing to say so and act so? If justice is what love looks like in public, is it only the purview of faith communities to work from a justice frame? Someone respond. Thinking. Well, let's turn to our advocacy groups. Do you work from a justice frame?
Yes.
Do you do so publicly?
Yes. I'm going to jump in. We, from the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church perspective, we believe that advocacy is a foundational expression of our faith in public life in the 21st century. And you can define advocacy in a variety of ways, but it is our role as Christians, and it is our responsibility as acting Christians to activate and be activists for those who don't have a voice themselves, those who are underserved, those who are underrepresented, those who are cast aside, those people that Jesus hung out with. Those are the people that we are tasked to activate for when we have power that those sisters and brothers of ours do not have.
Could you repeat that question just one more time?
If justice is what love looks like in public, is justice wholly the work of faith communities, or are advocacy groups active on issues from a justice perspective and willing to say so and act so?
I have a tendency to want to turn that question around a little bit, because is justice what love looks like in public? My problem is that the churches seems sometimes more concerned about love than about justice.
Yes.
And that's because perhaps they don't carry it forth like you have, like Cornel West, to say if we're really serious about love, then we've got to be about justice. But so many churches seem to make a sharp distinction. Love is this mushy, feel-good kind of sentiment that we show primarily individuals to each other, rather than this kind of social kind of justice emphasis. And so my question would be directed not so much at the advocacy groups as it would be toward the church. Is justice what love looks like with clothes on?
Yeah.
Or is love what, well, you know what I'm trying to say.
You can jump in.
Thank you kindly. Couple things that came up for me. One is the insular nature of religion. And as in church, synagogue, mosque as private social club. Sometimes skews our worldview and the sense that we have a responsibility to the body politic. We sort of lean on the concept, well, let me say this way, in the Pentecostal church they taught us, come out from among them and be separate, saith the Lord. Yeah. It goes on, touch not, taste not, handle not the unclean thing. That basically means it's us four and no more. I mean, that's kind of the concept. But there's something wrong with that because our understanding of the gospel, if I can just say it that way from my faith community, suggests that we are a city on a hill that should not be hidden. And we should be accessible to the body politic, that we are responsible to and for the work of justice, the work of love demonstrating itself as justice. If we are, that is the definition of the gospel. Let's be clear. And the other thing is that if it is not pushing the edge, if it doesn't have a scandalous nature to it, it is not the gospel. That's how you know it's the gospel, because it's scandalous. Essentially, it's pushing the acceptable social norm of a religious community as versus creating a comfort zone, a private social club. So please understand that where the gospel is present in the truest definition, there is both advocacy and love. Love leads to advocacy, advocacy to love. The two have to be married to each other in order for it to be the gospel.
Okay, so I see your hand, and so you can jump in this next question, which will tie in quite nicely. So I'm going to combine two questions. So has there been a sea change or transformative moment in the attitudes held in America regarding marriage equality? Is marriage equality at the heart of this change or emblematic of a larger shift, if a shift has occurred at all? The second part of the second question would be, what values, principles, or organizational or work habits do you view as key to successful collaborative work across the advocacy-faith divide?
Not too many questions.
I know. Had we time, this would have worked smoother. So choose and respond. I think you can weave this together. I believe you can.
Yes. My partner, Paul, of been together for 35 years, talks about that in American culture, in particular in our cultures, that marriage is the rite of passage to adulthood in many ways, although, of course, that's challenged in many communities in terms of what that means, but also sort of, being with a partner, establishing your own family in all those ways. And so I think we live in a culture that encourages people to have a divided lives. Parker Palmer talks about living the undivided life, but there's so many, public, private, and that's where closets are. We live in a world where there are many, many kinds of closets. There are political closets, there are, lifestyle closets, so many things. And people, we live in cultures that encourage that don't ask, don't tell culture in all kinds of ways. The most healthy thing that can happen is for people to come out about who we are without shame, and to talk about our loves and our lives, and to be open. That is the single most thing that shifts culture more than anything else, is for people to cross that line between private and public, between love and justice.
I think undeniably there is a sea change in people's attitudes. The research shows that, the polling shows that, and you can almost feel it. And I think a couple of things really account for that. Obviously, gays and lesbians coming out and being visible and being open with their families, open with their friends, and that ability for people to no longer associate LGBT people with the other just makes all the difference. The second factor, I think, is really our opponents, that, when they sort of took the marriage fight on, and we had all of these ballot measures and all of these states amending state constitutions, we lost all of them, but we sort of won the war, because every one of those states there were ads about the discrimination that gays and lesbians face in their relationships. Again and again, millions and millions of dollars in ads, and I think that was educating the public about gays and lesbians, making them more visible. They're visible on TV, all the other ways they were visible, but in that way, really educating people about the discrimination that was faced. And our opponents even said, it's not about discrimination, it's just about marriage. We think everybody should be treated equally. So even our opponents were articulating the value that we were trying to articulate. Even though they were doing it in somewhat of a negative frame, it still sunk in, it got through to the American people. On the other question, which I'm not going to relate them directly, because I see them as separate, so I'm going to answer it separately. I do think there is a challenge in integrating sort of the faith component with the policy component, because I am a linear thinker, and I am going to, the goal is there, we're going to do this and this and this and get there. Don't worry, I won't hit you. And so I think that way, and I know, as I deal with people who work with people of faith and clergy leaders, it's a conversation, and I'm like, let's get to the goal. We don't have time for the conversation, and then you put it into the context of a political debate or especially a ballot measure, and those are two completely different cultures. And I know that was constantly sort of the tension that the ballot measure campaigns had. And one of the reasons I think everybody was so deliberate about starting early when possible and having the conversation and taking the time to have the conversation was really helpful. But I do think there is that tension.
So I have Sharon and I have Rachel. I'm going to start Rachel and I'll go to Sharon, right?
Okay. I'll take a crack at the last question, also about advocacy groups and faith groups working together. Having mostly worked in advocacy groups in Washington myself, I think there are countless challenges in advocacy groups appreciating the contribution that the faith community can make. I think it starts with, just the rise of the nuns that was recently reported by Pew, and 20% of Americans now are unaffiliated, and so there's already, and when you look at sort of the liberal-leaning people, sort of an orientation, like certainly white liberal-leaning people, towards not being people of faith or not considering our group a group that's faith-oriented. And then I just think that the faith community needs to do a better job of showing that we've got it. We really have this amazing amount of power, of moral authority, of reach, of collaborative ability, of civility, everything else. And it's almost like, as a person who's been in communications, I want to design a strategic communications plan of how we can flaunt our role and our successes and our contributions that we can make and everything else, and bring it to the advocacy community to show them.
Yeah.
I have a slightly different take. When I'm a firm believer in the separation of church and state, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant in Maryland on the way the legislation was written. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I felt that the LGBT movement tried to have it all at once, and it was a question of what is the real goal, and to really focus in on civil marriage and what that meant, and being able to give the faith houses an out based on them administering their own doctrine the way we claim the separation of church and state is supposed to be. You don't want to tell the government what to do, we shouldn't tell you what to do. And then if the ultimate goal is you don't get any tax write-offs, then that's another battle, and take up that battle. But I thought that the brilliance of then allowing clergy to come out front and advocate for that principle, it changed the way the conversation was had, period. And I could definitely say how it played out in the African American community. So when you said, I was going like this because I was disagreeing, I wasn't scared you were going to hit me. Because I felt that that was a very strategic policy narrative that, especially with who everybody felt was the greatest challenge community, the African American community, it made us have a different conversation a different way. Now, I do think on the issue of advocacy and love, that I ran a parallel mission over the last 2 years to where I wanted to see more welcoming and affirming churches, or churches that cater specifically to the Black LGBT population. When I was honored to be invited to the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries conference in Las Vegas, when PAD invited me into the MCC PAD conference, and then I joined Covenant Baptist UCC, I saw this beautiful assembly of Black churches who were welcoming and affirming and talking to my community. So I went on a quest to say, let's stop making the Black church a certain sector of denominations and boxing ourselves out of that narrative. So when you use the example of love and justice, I want to see more of the Black LGBT churches in particular get more strategic, as Bishop Flunder has led, as No Wedge with Reverend Tolton has attempted to do, as Candy was the consummate advocate, holding us accountable between the social justice organizations and the faith community, trying to make sure we weren't missing from the narrative of the greater campaign. I felt that that was the significance of the role of the faith community that needs to be taken up a notch.
Yeah.
Because the one place, especially our community organizes regularly, is in the faith house. So as people are disorganized in their every walks of life, I would like a little more social justice narrative, as I received the email from my church email list this morning saying, we're going to be here at this workshop today, was very strategic, and that's what Covenant does. But a lot of our churches are so filled with just healing the bruise, that a great therapy for healing is activism. What was an incredibly difficult moment for me, and difficult for my heart particularly. I remember looking out over the audience of people who were gathered for what they thought was going to be a victory speech from Governor Romney. And I looked at their faces, and he wasn't prepared. He hadn't prepared a concession speech, and was away quite a while getting ready to do what it is that he did. But the folks were also completely unprepared. And what you saw on their faces was shock and awe. And the question that I had when I looked at them is that, and I watched them pray the rosary. I was watching people joining together in prayer circles, watching people calling on God, who were totally shocked and wanted a divine intervention to happen, to turn it around. And in that moment, as a person of faith, I thought to myself, I said, now, they are people of faith like I am a person of faith. How could we be on such fundamentally different pages and be people of faith? How is that conceivably possible? And what is it going to take for us to join our hearts together? And so in this new normal, I'm watching people sort of coming in from the edges, entrenched places. Kind of like when you paint. Anybody ever paint, knock a hole in the wall and have to plaster it, then you have to paint it, and you got old paint, and it's another color, and you try to go get new paint, and you don't want it to show up. So what you do is you have to feather your paint out like this. Anybody know what I'm saying? So you can blend something with something else. I'm watching that begin to happen among us in interesting ways, right? And around definitions of things like marriage equality and whether or not taxation should happen. And now we who were on the edge of marginality have become the people to know.
Yes.
We have to be studied now.
Yes.
How to get into our heads and into our hearts to connect us essentially to a belief system that will hopefully get us on the roll somewhere, if you understand what I'm saying, among the conservatives, if we can be conservatized in some way. So my heart says that as people of faith, this is a kairos moment a pregnant moment for us to find ways to one another as we sort of, our faith is feathering out a bit. I'm so surprised that my heart went out. I was shocked. But I watched the people and I watched them pray and cry. And it touched me. It touched me, and what I felt like I wanted to do is get among them and say, you have to shift when God shifts. You can't stay where you are. But then the question is, now what do I need to do? You hear me, brothers and sisters? What do I need to do now? How are we going to meet one another and cause faith to bring liberty to all of us?
Yes.
And to set us free from all of the multiple hatreds.
Yes.
Because I'm scarred too. I am. I want to admit that openly. I had to carry some of this to survive. But so now, where is the healing, and how can we be instrumental in bringing that to pass? How can we definitively decide that we will do that? That's the heart and soul in my thinking of what God is calling us to, if you allow me to say that, whatever your faith path. I believe that the divine is calling us to that.
So, we have just about come to the end, but there's another question that may help us get to the place where Bishop just described to some degree. So, to a large extent, the movement for equality for LGBT people over the last years has been tied up in marriage. Marriage has been the frame of LGBT equality. Will you agree with me? So I want to propose something. I want to propose that there is a class, racial, and social distinction as it relates to marriage equality. Okay? I want to propose that there are regional differences as it relates to what just happened in the election. And I want to propose that there are those who have a particular reading of Scripture that causes them to have a barrier to supporting marriage equality. So then, what do we do with these realities? So here's the question about the future. Suppose ENDA becomes law. Suppose DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, is eliminated. No longer the federal law, and federal rights to marriage and all of those privileges are available. What is the response of same-gender loving LGBT people, both in faith work and in advocacy work, around the huge remaining issues of poverty, unemployment, underemployment, incarceration, violence, access to health care, and spiritual healing? What now? What now? And so, if you will, cast with me. What does the future look like for those that never intend to marry, but have children, that need to go to school and eat and find a safe place to sleep every night? You're brilliant. You're on the panel.
You know, we have an epidemic of homelessness among, youth in our country who are queer, who are straight, who are everything in between. And I think that this is, one of the enormous challenges is as we come out and as we see ourselves as part of the fabric of every issue and every problem and every solution, I think we need to say, our people are in jail and prison today. And for many different kinds of reasons, for the same reason that everybody goes to jail and prison. And a lot of it is about poverty, and it's about, unemployment, and it's about drug addiction, and it's about, a war on drugs that has never worked in our country and that has oppressed people. It's about, we have a prison industrial complex in our country that, we are addicted to. if you know, we live in a world where the stereotypes around LGBT people include, you know, around class and around lots of other issues, and you know, our people are poor people in the same ratio that there are poor people in this country and around the world. And I think there is still in our community turning our backs on our youth and our kids who are very vulnerable, and not only in this country but around the world. So I think that's got to be high on our agenda.
I would, I mean, just as you were, you know, speaking to all those important issues, it's, you know, there will be a point, I believe, when we're really going to, you know, win these policy battles, and in the public space, and, you know, and there are also within the church institutions these polity battles that are going on too, to really break down discriminations happening in different churches. But even, you know, beyond those types of institutional battles, once we, you know, see those, I mean, then even outside of this country, there's a whole world where religion is really weaponized as a tool to really marginalize people.
Absolutely.
And I see Pastor Tolt and Pat, you know, different folks who are really involved with the international scene here. So it's, you know, it's, I always, I mean, the way that we've always worked is that, you know, houses of worship are so influential in our communities, and if there are more welcoming and affirming communities that are really sending out positive messages, really embracing their neighbors, that's going to be a good thing. And so that, you know, becomes a really making sure that the religious community is really at that level of welcome and affirmation of LGBT people universally is really, you know, that a deeper goal that we're working towards.
I think it's so important for especially the faith leadership at this table to, you know, we can't wait for marriage equality to figure this out, because we will be left behind. You know, let's be clear, only 76% of the LGBT community voted for Obama. So that means 24% voted another way. And classism is real. Yes. Classism is very real. And when people get what they want and they have not been reconditioned to be concerned about other people, history doesn't fail us. So I don't attend a single LGBT policy meeting called by the White House without being on that same committee on the African American side. So I don't only play in the gay house. I play in the black house. And in the black house, I bring gay in the room. So therefore, I'm on the Social Security Administration roundtable. I'm on Children and Families roundtable. I'm in every social service, homeless, poverty, sex trafficking table there is to ensure that a lot of these social issues where gay doesn't play, that gay is in the room. Because faith is always in the room. So the national churches, councils, and United Way partnerships, March of Dimes, and everybody, Catholic charities, they're in the room and they cringe when I stand up. Because I was on the invite list too. So it's very important that this faith leadership doesn't only play and is playing valiantly in international space, that you get in some domestic space as faith leaders to claim your seat at the table in those rooms where all the other faith leaders are. And it doesn't need to only be my voice in there because I'm secular. And I'm unapologetically secular in making sure that they understand that if you're black and gay, we skew and you don't count us because you don't service us. Because your faith houses don't service us. So our data is significantly missing. So I get called to the meeting after the meeting to talk about, well, we know there's an LGBT youth homeless program, but we can't find any organizations to work with. I know that there is overrepresentation of unemployment or health disparities, but we don't know because they want to talk to people of color, and particularly black people. HIV/AIDS is not a black disease because the I was dropped from HIV/AIDS advocacy. Okay, we were just invisible within the movement. in a meaningful way, and don't only tell me only black people are risky sexually, that it's now our disease after 30 years. So that parallel of who really was taken care of or took care of themselves and said, well, we got it under control, it's done. And now it's still a lot of white people trying to figure out how to fix a black epidemic.
Yeah.
I'm just being honest. So there has to be an intentionality on key leaderships of our community that understands all the different houses you must play in so that you're not left behind.
Well said.
Sarah, and please would you address the international implications of what I asked in the question?
Sure. When I was in high school, my parents were both pastors, and I remember when our congregation elected to be a Reconciling in Christ congregation, which means that we were proactively identifying our congregation as welcoming of LGBT community members in our community. And my dad was talking about all of the wealthy families that had been with the church from the church's beginning who were leaving. And I asked my dad if I was concerned about it. And he looked at me and he said, Sarah, the people who are leaving have somewhere else to go. And the people who are coming don't. And I think that I hope, I pray that the churches with which I'm affiliated are getting to a place where those people who are leaving actually don't have anywhere else to go, which is nice. But it's a constant reminder that we as people of faith are always tasked with finding the people who don't have somewhere else to go, and that includes our Lutheran churches and our Anglican churches in countries, and our Anglican churches and our Lutheran churches abroad that aren't welcoming those communities. And that's something that I live with in a daily reality of my work. And it's a constant struggle, but I am continually reminding myself that it is our message as Christians to let the people go who have somewhere else to go. And always be looking for the people who don't have anywhere else to go.
So, we are just over a week beyond last week's election. It's a little bit beyond a week. Champagne bottles have been opened. More will be opened in January, I guarantee you, in Maryland and other places where marriage is available. And tonight we've taken a faith perspective looking at what happened a week ago. But what we know is there are days and weeks and months and years in front of us. The word of the campaign was forward. The question that we all now must wrestle with is forward toward what? What does the future look like? And the commission from this panel to each of us is we get to shape it. But we can't just shape it for ourselves. We must shape it for all of us. One of the interesting things that happened last week is that there has been reporting that young people and Asian people and Hispanic and Latino people and African American people, they kind of coalesced in a way they'd never coalesced before. And they stopped and didn't say, and white people and Republican people and conservative people and evangelical people and Pentecostal people, because somehow the narrative has to be an us versus them, the insider and the outsider. Bishop, I believe that our commission as believers of whatever tradition is to make sure that everyone has a place inside. That the edges begin to blur and that the middle is big enough for everyone. And that every once in a while, those that have been silently left out, that their voices get heard in a new and fresh way, and we say, oh, we didn't know. We need to work on that too. Right? So as you leave tonight, remember what you heard. Carry it with you Friday night when you're walking to dinner with money in your pocket to pay for it, to sit with your friends and have a good time. Pause for a moment and consider those that have nowhere to go. Take it with you on Sunday morning when you're in worship and being thankful for a place where you can honor God, or Saturday, or Friday, or whatever day you worship. Those that believe God has nothing good to say about them. Take it with you to the wedding and celebrate. But remember our transgender brothers and sisters who are just trying to make $1 honestly and lose their job time after time after time. And we can shape a future better than that. So Pastor Wiley, you didn't even say a whole lot. Now is your time. Oh, sure.
I just want to say thank you to Kareem Murphy and Reverend-elect Dwayne Davis. And also Robert Raven and the Raven Group.
Yes.
Give them a big hand.
So you sat kind of silently a little bit, and I know that your mind was working, because I know you very well. So as we conclude, you have the 7 final minutes. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to thank you for your participation. I want to thank Kareem and all of the sponsoring organizations. I want to thank our panelists once again. And Pastor Wiley, I'm sure you have reflections. Based on what we said. If you don't need the whole 7 minutes.
I won't take 7 minutes. Let's show our appreciation to Cedric. Well, let me just say I have been thoroughly enriched by this panel, and I am honored to be a part of it. And I really appreciate the way we're closing out. I appreciate what you said about your father and your going to him when people were leaving. My wife and I have had a similar situation in our church. When we opened our doors and received the LGBT community with open arms and open hearts, then a lot of people left the church. But we came to that same conclusion, that those people had somewhere to go. And there's some people who didn't have anywhere where they could go, where they could feel like they could be themselves. They didn't have to hide. They didn't have to pretend. They could just be who they were. And so I appreciate that. The other thing is that when we talk about maybe all of these things that Cedric mentioned, all of these challenges that we have, if DOMA is done away with, and if we win all of the battles pertaining to the LGBT community, we better believe that there's still going to be some battles to fight. There are always some, and I think what Yvette has warned us of or cautioned us about is the fact that we need not get too comfortable when we win a victory. And we also need to be careful that we don't take on the same behavior that those who oppressed us exhibited in light of our oppression. That's why when people ask me, why would you do what you do? I just remember that regardless of talk about post-racialism, and I'm looking for post-racism, not racialism, but regardless of all of that talk, still, I can look back and be thankful for the way, from my faith tradition, that God has brought me through. And I also have to always remind myself, how can I ever forget growing up in the South and being an African American, how can I forget the oppression that we experienced? You know, not some of the harsh stuff that you've heard, but certainly going to separate bathrooms and climbing up flights of stairs to go to the movie and not being able to, you know, share equally with others. It seems to me that those of us who have experienced oppression in any form or any way ought to be the last ones in the world that would oppress somebody else. And so I think we just have to always be mindful that none of us, I think Martin Luther King, I love these very simple quotations from him. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. None of us are free until all of us are free. And I'm so happy to see Pat Baumgartner here from New York, the MCC church there. I had the privilege to go there a few years ago, go to New York, and that's where I met Pat actually. And we participated in a conference that was dealing with homeless LGBT youth. And I was never so touched and blessed as to be a part of that experience. It opened my eyes to a whole world. And they talked about not only runaways, but throwaways. And that was a new concept and understanding for me. And then Pat was kind enough to invite me to her church, to preach at her church. And that was a blessed experience. And so I always think, I'm not trying to preach because it looks like I am taking up those 7 minutes, but I'm going to close with this. I think of Jesus when he was, you know, with a group of people and teaching and ministering, and his mother and his brothers and his sisters were outside. Yes. And somebody sent him a message and said, your mother and your brothers and sisters, they're looking for you. And he said, who are my mother and brothers and sisters? And he looked around at all the people, all the broken people, the people who needed healing, the people who were suffering. And he said, you are my brothers and my sisters and my mother. And so I think that until we get that if there's anybody hurting, if there's anybody suffering, then we still got some work to do. Then I think until we get that, then, you know, we definitely do have some work to do. Thank you very much.
So there's an offer, and so I would invite those that are still here to join us as we close out in prayer. Visit all of the organizations' websites that are represented here on this panel. They need your support. They need your voices to continue to move them forward. Give when you can. It's the holiday season and tax time, so make those contributions to the organizations you see seated here on this panel to support us in our work.
I don't know what is your ritual of prayer from the faith community that you're a part of, but if it's not too complicated, it would be great if we could touch one another. Touching hands, if that's not problematic. Let's pray. God of our weary years, the God of our silent tears, the God who has brought us thus far on the way. God who has by your might led us into this light. Keep us forever in your path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met you. And lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget you. We offer ourselves to you. We offer ourselves to all that is good and is right. We offer ourselves to you for a fresh baptism in your love, in your grace, in your justice. We offer ourselves up now for radical inclusivity. extravagant grace, and relentless hospitality. And so we hear, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He or she who loves not knows not God, for God is love. Amen. Amen.